Okay, so we had a little video malfunction there. So let's talk...
Mercury's in retrograde.
Yes, we're totally blaming it on that. Okay, so let's talk about some DC characters that you want to get in there that maybe you haven't had a chance to yet, or wish list.
Honestly, we haven't. We've been really fortunate. I mean, we had a lot of requests this year for different fun characters, and last year, starting with Slade, and this year, obviously, with Flash was sort of the big one, and but there hasn't been everyone. And there's a couple that I'm just hiding, obviously, because the fun, the joy of people being like, "What?" They said, "What?" But there's, we've been really, so far everybody's been a go. So, and there's obviously, I think there's probably, definitely 20-30% more DC characters this year than there were even last year.
Well, there's a little Ra's al Ghul mention.
There was.
Is there any chance that we'll see him?
We rarely, I'm not sure when, but we would rarely, I don't think as storytellers we would ever sort of say something like that without wanting to actually do something with something like that.
Would that maybe possibly, and I don't know if you can say this, but be this season or?
I can't say.
Okay.
That I can't say. I'll get in trouble.
Okay, I don't want to get you in trouble.
Yeah.
I'm just curious because I'm curious about your dream casting for Ra's al Ghul.
Oh gosh, I'm always so open because the one thing I've learned is just you can always be surprised with cat. You have an idea of so and so in your head, but inevitably it's always been someone who just walks in the room that just is the role. So there's lots of possibilities.
That makes me really, really happy. Sorry, as soon as I heard that I was like, what? So yes, I'm fine now. I'm totally fine now. I'm kind of a nerd.
I'm glad you enjoy it.
Oh, yeah. You could say that. All right, so let's talk about The Flash. Let's first actually talk about casting him.
Yeah. It was challenging because, we didn't have a script. We certainly don't have the big episode script yet where it will be really Flash-centric.
Yeah.
We had sides, and you want... It's not just a character who you want to have chemistry with Oliver... or with Felicity or with Dig or with Detective Lance, but you also want you wanted an actor who you felt like you could construct a show around, or this individual, that episode when we go to do it. So it really was hitting a moving target, and everyone was really working together in terms of everybody up there, and wanting to make themselves available, and David Nutter, who's going to direct that episode 20, which will serve as backdoor pilot. He was very involved in the process, and Andrew and Jeff and the network and the studio, and a lot of scrutiny. And so you're seeing a lot of people, and and Grant, again, he was like Steven, weirdly, this is very weird, was the first person to come in the door for the part.
Really?
Both of them were the first people to audition.
Wow.
And with Steven, it was in the height of pilot season, first person to audition, and 48 hours later we had him in front of the network. It's not pilot season, we had lots of time, so Grant came in, but then we saw 600 other people from all over. A really deep well of options, and every time he sort of just kind of kept sitting, in the front of our brains as someone who had a lot of the attributes that we were looking for.
So, talk a little bit about picking Flash. I mean, obviously, with Jeff's connection and all of that, and it seems perfectly logical.
Right.
But out of all the characters that you could have picked, what was it about this particular one that made you want to do a spin-off?
Well, a couple things. One, for me personally, it's always been a character that I really loved. I grew up in the Crisis of Infinite Earths time when he sacrificed himself, and it was the first comic book character that made me cry, and I just loved the notion that he had these abilities, but he wasn't super himself. He was still a human with super speed. And so there was a vulnerability to that, and I liked his wide-eyedness sort of approach to the other DC characters in the world. And that spirit and that heart of the character. We knew that we did want to grow because I think if we're not challenging ourselves and taking risks, we're just sort of doing the same show. So we knew this year, for us, we wanted to grow Arrow in a way where we could begin to introduce, superpowers, into the show. And he just, for me, seems synonymous with that. Then there is the obvious other things about, the fact that he's a CSI. There are other elements that lend itself to, hopefully, potentially a really exciting television series. The world of science that he moves in, and so it was a combination of personal reasons that we all kind of had. I think Jeff felt the same way, Andrew felt the same way. The technology, really visual effects on television catching up to the point where you feel like you could do something that wasn't cheesy.
Yeah.
So the timing in that regard, and probably lastly, I would say the spirit of the character, which I think is so resonant for me right now, which is we all have these devices, we have this ability to do more. We all, in a way, time has sped up for each of us. And yet, in a weird way, it creates this. We'll never get enough done.
Yeah.
So there's this. I think something's timely about him and about it right now in terms of this ability to really be everywhere at once in our own way. But what kind of dilemmas does that cause for us emotionally and as a society, as people? And so all of those things, all of those sort of felt like the reason.
Did you guys, were you planning on bringing in superpowers from the beginning, from the concept of doing Arrow, or was that?
Well, we knew if we were not for Arrow specifically.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think it's, you never want to get too ahead of yourself, and so you always, every time you want to take a step, you want to be as sure as possible about what that step is. But we did know that if we were going to honor if we were fortunate enough to do the DC universe, that we would be able to do other characters in the DC universe, and at some point you run out of characters that don't have superpowers.
There's that.
So and that is an active why of the universe, of that universe. So that was, so I think we knew, but we weren't sure, sort of. It really was kind of in probably the last quarter of last year where we thought, oh, maybe we take the swing now. Maybe we don't wait, till season 4 or season whatever, but we actually, how might that reinvigorate certain elements about the show now that are, and give us a chance to grow.
That's really cool. And obviously this is a very, very different Arrow from Smallville and all of that.
Sure.
But when you're thinking about characters to bring in, does that ever cross your mind? Well, we did a different version of that, or like Oliver, it doesn't really matter.
I don't think it. I think it's always about. I think whenever we do any kind of character that may have been done before in any way, we are cognizant for sure about all the various ways, even the ways they've been presented in the comic book.
Yeah.
Because there's stuff to cull from and learn from each of those things. But then inevitably at the end of the day, you got to kind of go, all right, so now what's our version? Why are we doing this? What's important about this to us? What's important about who the character was in its origin? For us, why did they do it then? Why is it still resonant now? All those things are kind of things you think about.
Well, even going back to Canary, it's interesting. I'd actually talked to Mark about this, about, when fans were like, oh, but it's not Dinah and all.
Right.
So, but there's such a history for people who actually read comics.
Yes.
Of retconning and changing the story and
Sure.
using the same character to retell it differently.
Yeah.
So do you feel like when you're bringing in a new character, you want to absolutely give it an original spin?
I think we always want to give it our version. Sometimes it's less. Sometimes the version that is there works perfectly. For what the show is. Because it's its own organism. But you always want to do something. I think you do want to play with expectation and surprise, because it is the nature of wanting people to sort of show up every week and if everyone always knows everything that's going to happen and how it's going to happen, then they have the fun of the engagement of the experience of watching a show, and so I think our most successful things are when we arrive at something that people know, but not necessarily in the manner or the way that they think we're going to get there. Exactly. And sometimes